How do you market the show in a way to bring in the thousands of people?
You really need a foundation across all social platforms. Web3 needs a reset. You need the catchy title first. If you have no audience, if you don't have no network, the moment you post that content, it goes to waste.
How did you come up with the idea of brick by brick? Bausa, obviously you've managed to build one of the, I would consider one of the biggest shows in Web3, brick by brick. You had an astronomical rise, went from a completely new show to a show that now racks in a couple thousand listeners per episode. So really what I'm going to be picking your brains about is, how is it that you've managed to build such a show? How did you line up the quality speakers that you've managed to bring up? How do you market the show in a way to bring in the thousands of people that you have? And obviously, how is it that you have monetized yourself as a host so far? And how do you see brick by brick evolving in the future? So before that, let's start with the foundation. Bausa, tell us, how did you come up with the idea of brick by brick? I feel a lot of people struggle with that initial ideation phase where they have all these things they're passionate about, but they struggle to put them into an action, they struggle to turn an idea into a creation. So how did that look like for you?
Right. That's a really great question. And to be honest with you, brick by brick was, the phrase brick by brick, it almost came extremely naturally. And it was one of those things where I'm just simply looking for a good name / brand that correlates with Bausa, right? So even before brick by brick came about, the way that I was building the brand of Bausa was along the lines of personal growth, Web3, and education, right? So those are like three main key pillars that I would summarize myself. And whenever you would see my brand and whenever you'd see my content, it would be something along those lines, right? And so the term brick by brick, where it came from, it was just this idea that every single day, right, we lay down one brick at a time, right? Some are able to put down multiple bricks in one day, and that's really good, right? While some, they may only put down one brick a day, right? And so the idea of brick by brick is to represent that visual journey of what it's like to be an entrepreneur, or what it's like to be a creator, right? And it's one of those things where I actually posted about this a couple of days ago. It's like this visual of this guy laying down like this one layer of bricks, and he was like, okay, this looks kind of cool. And then like the next part of the visual is like it's him getting a little bit higher, and he's like, oh, like, but it's the caption in the middle one, he says, oh, this is useless, right? And then the last one is where he's built this crazy tower, and he's like, wow, like I've come such a long way, right? And so that's the whole idea of brick by brick, is I wanted to represent that journey, right? And in these creators that I'm surrounded with, and even I myself, that as I continue to build my brand and my career, it was just something to represent that idea, you know? So, and I think many people understand that, right? I get a lot of comments, especially when people are replying back to me. They're like, brick by brick, like they know that it's a representation of growing, you know? So I'm glad it sticks that way.
It is an intuitive name. Yeah, people, it's not something that you need to explain to people what it means or what they can expect.
Right.
So then let me ask you, how important do you think the name of the show is to the actual success?
That's a good question. I mean, that's the thing, is I want people to be reeled in, not just by the title, but of the discussions, right? The information that you hear when you join my spaces. I want that to really stick with you when you leave my spaces, right? And so that moving forward, every time you see the brand brick by brick, that you're reminded that of that one space that you joined and was like, I left with a good amount of inspiration, or I left with a good amount of with value, right? And so that's the way I want it to stick. As long as I can capture that specific group of people that are interested in growing and learning valuable skills, then that makes me happy, you know? So that's where I feel, as long as I can make that impact, people will remember brick by brick in that direction.
So here's the school of thought I come from in marketing. So let's take the example of email newsletters.
Right.
There's two types of email subject lines you can send out. The first one, let's say you are subscribed to Leon's newsletter. Let's call it Leon's newsletter. You can have a subject line called Leon newsletter edition number 47. Or the second type of variation you could have for that same email you send out is crypto is collapsing. The FCC is coming after us. That can be the headline. So it's the content of the actual newsletter used as the headline. And I see those two when there's different people use the same. I come from the school of thought of the second one, giving people a taste of what they can expect from within the content. But something I see a lot on Twitter Spaces, for example, we were talking about the espresso shot, very popular spaces. They lead with headline number one, the espresso shot, and you can expect to listen to the espresso shot. Brick by brick is a little bit the same also. It's brick by brick. So for you, and here we're talking about the headline. When you schedule your spaces and this is the first thing people are going to see, which of those two would you lean towards, and which one of those two have you seen performs better?
Definitely, you need the catchy title first. Like, and here's what I do, and here's what I realize I do a lot now is on the day of the spaces, I will actually remove brick by brick from the title, and I'll actually just keep the topic of the space then and there. Because why? When someone is scrolling through the spaces tab, they don't want to read brick by brick. They don't want to read espresso shot right away, right? They want to see simple and straightforward. What is the title of the spaces, And then afterwards is when I'll rename the space and I'll add brick by brick afterwards, So that's a little alpha right there. You can edit the title of the space post show, So, and that's what I'm saying. Like that also goes hand in hand with marketing. You want to make sure when people are finding your space that it's one, recognizable right away, and two, the title of the space itself has to be captivating, So that's my take on that.
Got it. Okay. So option two. Take us through this. You got the idea of brick by brick, woke up one day inspired, this is going to happen. You throw your first spaces. What were the results? Underwhelming, overwhelming, normal?
I was so overwhelmed, and I just remember because I remember even just tweeting about it. I remember tweeting like, guys, I'm hosting my first spaces this Thursday. And I just I try to move with zero expectations just so that, I'm not hurt at the end, right? But when I started that space, if I remember correctly, within the first 5 minutes, I probably had like 60 to 80 people already. And then within the 10, 20, 30-minute mark, I remember seeing around 110 and 100 people listening live. And that, when I saw that, I was like, wow, like, I was completely blown out the water, and it was one of those things where I felt like I was really taking that next step in my journey. It was one of those things where I knew this was the right direction and this was the best move. And so, yeah, if I remember correctly, it's like June 7th, I think, or June 10th is the first episode of Brick by Brick. And it will forever stick with me.
So what would you say are the series of things that you did before the show even started that allowed you to kickstart that on such a strong note?
Right. I love talking about this, actually. It's because I always try to emphasize to people that you almost need it's not even just you really need a foundation, like across all social platforms, especially if you're a creator like myself, where we are very, we're on spaces, we do content creation, right? Like you need a person, not just a PFP, you need a human embodiment to the brand, right? And so I spent my first 2 years really just networking and, doing all these mod jobs, collab manager jobs, just to really get my name out there, just to really build my expertise in this space. And then once I found spaces, I started hopping on spaces and just speaking on them. Getting my again, same thing, getting my name out there, making the friendships, creating relationships with people, right? And so I'd done that for, I would say, like a year and a half. And then there came a point where I felt like I hit this ceiling, right? I couldn't see it, but I felt it, where I felt like I hit this ceiling where I can only go so far just by writing content and doing threads and like doing all these, very content creative writing base type of posts, right? And so that's when I decided, like, you know what? I think it's time to start my own spaces. And that was by far the greatest ROI I've ever seen. It's really shown that you need to build a network, you need to build this credibility, this reputation before you want to do anything big, such as hosting your own spaces, right? And that's where I feel like I had this much support, was because within those 2 years, I was really just fostering these friendships and, making opportunities, spreading my brand around, So once I felt like that was established and I took care of that, then 6 months later, I'm starting my own spaces, So that's why I feel like I got that huge boost of support when I first started my first episode.
I love that. I love that. So then let's go a little bit more tactical. Let's say I'm someone on X wanting to build my personal brand, obviously wanting to start an X show because it is the best way to build strong bonds, strong relationships, network with the right people in the space, and ultimately build brands that become part of Web3 culture. Spaces is an incredibly powerful tool. I've landed business thanks to Spaces. I've met incredible people. Bausa, you and I are here today, even working together now, thanks to, in part, the relationship we built over those 30-hour-long session over Spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you were starting from zero. What would be the series of steps you would do in a tactical manner?
Right. I like this one. The first thing I would do is you have to identify, one, what is your intention, right? Because you can't just be navigating in this space with no direction in mind, right? And it's hard enough for people to find their niche, find their targeted audience, right? All of these things, but I feel people neglect that first step, which is, what is my intention in this space, right? So first identify that. For me, it was, I want to help people, straight and simple. I want to help people. I want to provide value with the knowledge that I have and teach people through my skills of expertise, whether that's in content creation, branding, whatever that may be, right? So identify that intention. Second, I would focus on networking, because people can spend all their time creating the most highest form of quality content, but if you have no audience, if you don't have no network, the moment you post that content, it goes to waste, right? So before you even consider starting creating content, make some friends, right? Find people who are within that same intention that you discovered within yourself, and create bonds with them, right? Like, form an actual genuine relationship, provide value on their table.
How does one do that?
And this is a great question as well, right? So for me,
and I ask mainly, sorry to cut you there, Bausa.
Yeah,
I ask mainly because a lot of times, and this is something I understandably, it takes time to network. If every time you see someone who has an interesting profile, you reach out to them, you're like, hey, let's hop on a 30-minute call. If you do that 10 times, all of a sudden that's 300 minutes. That's a couple hours. It's a part-time job. So how do you do it in an efficient way while still being impactful?
Right. So the people that you want to reach out to, right? You have to identify what is an issue that this person might be going through. And is there something on my end that I can provide in value to them, right? Or is there something on my end that I can solve this issue, right? And so one of the hardest things too, especially when you're first starting off, is people tend to neglect smaller accounts just because of lack of credibility, right? Lack of that experience, reputation, right? And so what I did, and this was like, again, I know many people have different takes on this, but I offered a lot of free work just to show them that, hey, this is going to be free and this is going to be the highest quality of service you're going to get of this, right? And so whether for me at the time, that was community management, right? I did a lot of community positions where it wasn't paid at first, right? But then it eventually became monetized. But that's how you really get your foot in the door. You have to identify people's issues, solve their issues, offer it and sell it at the most highest value, and to them that's free work, right? And I know many people would argue against me, but who would neglect free work and it's the best work, right? So once you do that with like 5 to 10 people, they're going to tell their friends like, hey, this Bossa guy, he knows how to manage community wells. Let me refer him to you, right? So now you don't have to do much of the talking. Now it's your network spreading the good word about you, you know? So that's how I would approach it, you know?
I love that. I love that. Let's talk about guests. One of the best ways to grow your show is through the network of the people you bring in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is interesting because it sounds like we're starting to see similarities with the networking part. But for you, what is your framework to landing and inviting high quality guests to your show?
Yeah. So, you know, obviously there's many ways, right? One of the most common ways is if you already have I guess a mutual friendship between me and this high profile guest, I would simply just reach out to them in DMs, right? But sometimes even DMs themselves, especially with people of high profiles, it's a very hard time to catch their attention, right? And so you have that 50% chance where they do show up or they don't show up, right? The other option that I do, and this is something that I've been focusing on a lot, is just how can I get their attention through a space that I know they're knowledgeable in, right? And so for an example, I'll give you an example. This past Thursday when I hosted my Brick by Brick episode, the topic was just on Web3 needing a reset, right? The title was literally Web3 needs a reset, right? And so that alone catches almost anyone's. You don't have to be a CEO of a project. You can be a marketer, you can be a collab manager, you can be a moderator. That title alone makes you be like, oh, like what does this mean? Like, yeah, I agree. Web3 does need a reset, right? So that sometimes that strategy alone can capture these high quality guests, right? And so when I do get these high quality guests, I put the spotlight on them a lot because, again, in the behavior of psychology, people like when they get to talk about themselves, right? It makes them feel good, right? It makes people feel good when you ask them questions that they're really knowledgeable in, right? And so I do these with these high profile guests. And then once the show is done, I reach out to them afterwards. And I'm like, hey, thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate your takes. Please come by again for the next week, right? So now moving forward, they have this really good first impression that my spaces was, one, really enjoyable for them, and two, that I'm taking the extra step to reach out to them afterwards and be like, hey, thank you so much for joining. I would love to invite you to the next one, right? And so that's how I get this consistent flow of the same high profile people stopping by, you know, because it's like my show treats them. It's not just a spaces. It's their own platform to come and share their voice, right? So it's almost like a reverse psychology. It's like, yes, it's my show, but I'm going to make it feel like it's yours. You know, I'm going to make it feel like you can speak freely here.
Now that you say that, I do recall something you do very often is that you celebrate whenever you get someone coming up.
Yes.
That is, it's not only like, hey, welcome Leon to the show. It's like, no, it's like, oh my God, Leon, you're here. Like, guys, let me give you a background story of me and Leon, how we got to. So you do make the guests feel special. I now that you say it, I see it, and it makes the show very genuine as well.
Exactly.
It's a win at every front.
Exactly. Yeah,
I like that.
and yeah. Yeah, just to add quickly on top of that is um that's that's a secret like key to forming relationships over spaces, right? And it shows that I myself have a huge personal interest in what this person has going on, right? And I like how you said that. It's more than just saying, "Hey, Leon, welcome to the stage." It's like, "Leon, you just released your own newsletter. I saw it the other day. Huge congrats on that, by the way. And now I will pass you this microphone." Like introducing them to like that makes them feel really good, you know? So I try to focus
Oh, that's
in on
fantastic.
that emotional response.
That's very good, man. That's very strong. Very powerful. What would you say is the sweet spot when it comes to the number of speakers on stage?
Oh man, full. Make my room full.
The more the
Yeah,
better.
more the better. And I love it sometimes when all the hands are raised because that's how I know like the topic that I chose for today makes people feel engaged and they all have a piece that they want to share. You know, so as long as I can see that and I hit that every single space, that's how I know I'm killing it.
Do you try to, because the last thing you want is the space becoming a little bit too monotonous and someone holding the mic for too long, because the people do have a tendency to sometimes ramble.
Right.
So how do you keep those what is the ideal minute per speaker that they should have the mic for it to still be novel, entertaining, new ideas without it being too much of this one person?
Right, right. I love this question. So there are many ways to go about this, right? And so I'll give you an example. In my spaces, right? Obviously the space starts off with no one with their hand raised, right? So you have to start off, you can't just ask the entire room, "All right, guys, what does Web3 need to reset?" No, that's the most terrible way to make people feel engaged, right?
Awkward silence after.
Awkward silence, right? You see no one raise their hand, right? So I myself need to have a very first strong opinion, right? And whether it's a hot take, whether it's just easing into the topic, right? You need to have that introduction, right? That introduction is key. And so after that introduction, you might get one hand raised. You might get two hand raised, right? And so after calling on these first couple hands, right? That might spark another hand to raise from what this person said, right? And that's how you get people to talk. Because what I realize in spaces, right, is it's usually the conversation between the host and the speakers. But when you get to have your speakers discuss with another speaker, and I'm the host, just muted, not talking, it's engaging, right? It's nice to see when you just have the speakers speaking their thing, let them speak, right? And then to answer your question of the ideal per minute, I will actually pre-surface the room, because this is now this is the point of the space where everyone or there's a lot of hands raised, right? Everyone wants to share, right? So this is where I'll be like, "Okay, guys, we have a lot of hands raised. Can everyone please give me a thumbs up if we're okay to speaking 3 minutes max?" Right? I feel 3 minutes is the right amount of time for everyone to speak. All right. As long as everyone can respect that, we can get through these hands efficiently. And I want everyone to share their take. Right. And so once there's that mutual agreement in the room and everyone's like, "Okay, I can do that," then it feels more flowy, right? There's no friction. The speakers aren't worried about, "Oh, am I hogging the mic too long?" No, because I told you that 3 minutes, just, do some 3-minute talks. Like that's a good amount of time, right? So as long as you do it in a very smooth and seamless way and you make sure people are just aware of the situation, reading the room is how I describe it. As long as you can read the room, and I make sure that a lot of my speakers are, then I let them speak, And just one last thing is there's good monologue and there's bad monologue, right? Good monologue is when people are able to expand on the topic, right? And you can usually tell if it's a good take. And sometimes on the other hand, where it's like bad monologues, that's when I'll usually step in and I'll be like, oh, hey, Leon, let me ask you a question. Let me stop. Let me pause you right there. Let me ask you a question, right? Just to kind of like break that awkward waiting silence. And then it kind of refreshes the ears of everyone listening in, you know? So it takes a lot of practice. I will say that it takes a lot of practice to just identify and read the vibe that's going on in the room. But if you can do it without acting like you're nervous or you feel like things are getting awkward, you know, that's key, you know? So make it as flowy as possible, free flow. That's the aim.
That's powerful, man. You're dropping a lot of golden nuggets.
Yeah,
I really
thank
like
you.
that part. Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I really like that part where you said start with a strong opinion, a hot take. So you start off by setting the tone
Yes.
of the room, and then it gives people context and enough material so they can start playing around with
Exactly.
that, and then the room naturally evolves organically.
Exactly.
That's very strong. In your mind, do you have brick by brick? Let's assume a 3-hour show. Do you have a certain framework that you follow? Okay, first 1 hour, first 15 minutes introduction, then 1 hour, then recess, then 1 hour. What is your if you are to look at things very high level, what does your framework look like, and how, and should people kind of follow that? Because obviously it's like a 3-hour show is like a movie. You need to keep someone from minute 1 to minute 180 focused with you. It takes an art, and you need to take people through different from a place to another at different points. So what does your framework look like?
Right. First thing is I used to my first 5 episodes, I would say, is the only time that I would say I had a framework. Every episode after episode 5 became, let me just freestyle these shows.
Okay.
And let things just happen naturally. But let me explain the framework, right? So usually I would spend like the first 10-15 minutes just not even talking about the topic. Let me just talk to my co-host. Let me check in with everyone. How's everyone's day doing? You know, let me play some music, right? Let me set the vibe for the room. And then, right, around 30-minute mark is when I'm like, okay, guys, let me introduce the topic, right? Like, this is what we're talking about today, right? So that's when I'll say my strong opinion. If I have a hot take, I'll say it around then and there, right? And then moving from there, I would usually aim to about an hour of just really good discussion, right? But within those hours, I'm doing these mini breaks where I'm like, real quick, guys, I just want to reset the room. Thank you to everyone who is just joining in. This is Brick by Brick, episode 19, right? And then what I like to do a lot is I'll scroll through the audience and I'll just be like, I just want to give a shout out to Kermit in the crowd. Thank you for coming, Kermit. I know you're always busy, but the fact that I see you here, it means a lot to me, right? Shout out Juan, shout out P, like all these people, right? So I'll do that every now and then. I won't do it all the time because it loses like that flavor if you do it a lot, right? So I'll do that in these discussions, in these middle of these discussions. And that in itself is a break from the main topic, right? Because people can't listen to the same conversation, in my opinion, for almost more than 30 minutes. If you're going over 30 minutes and it's still the same topic, people get bored, right? So learning when to reset the room and learning when to turn the corner on a different topic is extremely crucial. And if we're going to talk numbers here, I would suggest to start doing it in like 30-minute intervals, right? See what kind of topics pique people's minds more than other ones, right? So as long as you focus on that makes the framework feel natural, right? And yeah, I'll let you go.
That's very interesting. Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I can't but recall a recent show we were both speaking on recently last Wednesday. We were both on Chill and Grill. And at some point there were like 600 people on stage. And midway through the conversation, you sent a text on the private group we had, all the speakers, and you were like, "Yo, Tolly, let's reset the room," and you said, "Let's someone make a joke."
Yes.
Because it was a very heavy, very serious conversation. We were
Right.
literally taking feedback from projects and grilling them, and it was
Right.
very intellectual heavy. So why at that point did you feel, if you were to recall how the room was, what made you at that specific point send that message requesting the group to reset?
Mm-hmm. Immediately, I sent that message because I'm thinking in the perspective of my audience, right? As a host, it's super hard sometimes to step out of your own shoes as the person who manages and controls the topic. You need to always look at it from the perspective of a listener. How does the conversation, the past hour, the past 30 minutes, even the past 5 minutes, how did that just sound like to my listener? Right? And you described it very well. The past 30 minutes was a very intelligent, intellectual conversation. And right. And that in itself requires a lot of brain power for even people to just want to listen into and listen intently. Right? That's the whole point of our space is Chill and Grow, right? Like we want you to listen intently. And so after doing so for like 20, 30 minutes, it can feel very exhausting, you know? So that's what made me be like, hey, totally, let's crack a joke. Let's crack a joke here, you know? So, and I think Breads, he was the one that initiated it, you know? So it was perfect, right? And then immediately after that 3 minute joke time, we were like, all right, guys, back on topic. Let's go to the next person, right? So it felt very natural. Felt very genuine.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt almost like a sip of water. You know,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about the co-host position, because that is one very important one. A co-host will complement, is the person that complements your show. Would you say a good co-host is someone that resembles you, so has the same qualities as you do, or is it someone that has that brings a different angle to the show? So here's my example. My Kermit and I, both business partners, we both regularly host community building secrets. Both of us tend to be a lot more on the serious, more intellectual, smart conversation. That's we both fit that. But you, for example, Bausa, with Brick by Brick, you are kind of that smart intellectual conversation, and your co-host Bread's very entertaining, very light. He knows how to crack the joke. He knows how to make the room laugh. So for you, what is the perfect dynamic between the host and the co-host?
Yeah. I mean, you just described it, right? I think sometimes too much of the same thing doesn't make the host and co-host stand out as individuals, right? And that's how I want my spaces to be formatted. Is I don't want the spotlight. I want Breads and Gobsock to have the spotlight as well, right? But when you look at us as a group, right, we paint this picture of education with comedy and right back to being informative, right? And so that's why, to me, I enjoy when Breads is like the devil's advocate, right? When when I say a point and he counters me with a rebuttal, I like that, right? Because it would be boring if my co-host just agreed with everything that I said, you know? So you do kind of need like that yin and yang kind of balance, right? But honestly, the way I look at it is personality, right? It's not about the knowledge that co-hosts or hosts have. It's about the personality, because we can all share the same knowledge and talk about the same topics, but because of how we are as individuals, we can say the message differently, you know? So have that difference, you know? I would say having too much of the same thing gets very boring, I would say. It loses its flavor.
Yeah, again, another golden nugget. The co-host is what can actually make you stand out as a character.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes for the co-host back.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
that's very powerful. I like that. So in marketing, when you are about to roll out a new product, when you're about to roll out a new service, or you're about to make an announcement, there's a sequence that you want to follow, where you start by whispering that there's something coming, Then you move into the teasing phase. You give more information, a little bit more colors. This is where, when, for example, the artist is drawing something at the beginning, it looks like a random sketch of shapes, and the teasing phase is where things start looking like something real. Oh, he's drawing a horse. And then the final one is where you start shouting. This is where you make the call to actions. We're dropping next week. We're dropping next Tuesday. Sign up on this. Do that. Do this. This is the framework. Whisper, tease, scream. Something I learned from Alex Hormozy himself. For you, every show, what is your marketing framework that you follow that allows you to have those couple thousand people tuning in?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like people who would be listening to this, they would probably expect this crazy framework that I've built. But believe it or not,
17-step marketing framework.
Believe it or not, it's really on Mondays. I know Mondays are probably the most active days on X, right? It's like the start of a new week. People are ready to hop back on the social apps. People are ready to talk about what they want to share, right? And so I utilize Monday knowing that it's one of the hottest activist days on X. And I will literally just be like, I will create a content that just says, hey guys, like Brick by Brick is right back again this Thursday. This week, we're talking about how to build a personal brand, right? Or what I will do on a more creative approach is I will use the form of long form posting, right? Just because I know that long form posts at the moment, it does really well in the algorithm, right? And if you are a very creative writer where you can paint a narrative in people's minds and almost captivate them in this little post, right? That will be my way of how I attract you to join Brick by Brick, right? So for an example, I remember this past week's or last week's post was, the first hook of my post was Web3 needs a reset, right? So that simple sentence alone, that simple hook alone made you want to be like, oh, what does Bossa have to say here, right? And then once you click on the show more of the long form post, you would read at the very end, I would be like, let's talk about this in Brick by Brick later this Thursday. Set those reminders below, right? And so how I measure this is how many likes I get on that post, let's say it's 100. If I can get 50 reminder notifications out of those 100 likes, then I know I converted a good amount of them, right? Because it takes a lot of interest to someone to want to tap on your post to read more and then scroll all the way to the bottom to then hit set reminder, right? So those are the ways that I do that. And I repeat that on Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday will be the post that strictly just says Brick by Brick is tomorrow. See you guys there. And then it's just the spaces link, right? And that's when I see my reminder notifications go from like 60 to 70, 80 reminders to then 110, 120 reminders. And then on the day of, I'm in a lot of these group chats that are spaces host people, a lot of my friends that host their own spaces, and I would just share my link in there, right? And so by that time of the day, my spaces, I have about 140 to like 130 reminders set, right? Which in return brings me that audience, so that's my strategy there. Nothing too complicated. It's really just, painting narratives and building up to the day of the space,
And a lot of times, man, in marketing, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's the fundamentals that just have to be followed.
Exactly. Yeah.
What would you say, Bausa, is something you should do better?
Yeah. It's funny. I was just telling myself this last week is I want to do more personal outreach of just inviting people to my spaces, right? And I know that this is a strategy other space hosts use as well, is they'll contact them 2 to 3 days prior to the space and be like, hey, this Thursday would love to have you here again. Or if it's someone brand new, be like, hey, I wanted to invite you to my spaces this week. I know you're knowledgeable in this one area, and the topic for this week is along that, and I would love for you to come share a take, right? So I wish I did more of that, but then it's funny because they always somehow end up joining my spaces, even if I don't invite them personally, So, but really, other than that, I wish I did more of like that personal outreach.
I've noticed something that has increased my conversion rate a lot. I would ask people in my audience, who would you like me to have on the podcast, on Twitter? And they would tag that person. What I would then do is I would screenshot that and send that to the person itself. Because now all of a sudden, there is that social proof that, okay, it's not just Leon who wants to hear from me. It's Leon and these 7 other people as well.
I like
and
that.
just doing that, it's how I had Shiv come up on the podcast.
Oh wow, yeah,
just like that.
Yeah,
That was the way. So it works.
That's
it
a
works.
golden
It works
nugget.
great, and it feels very organic.
yes, it does. I love that. That's the gem. That's a gem right there.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm happy. I guess my final question to you, Bausa, relates to monetizing. Spaces is this very delicate thing where you cannot really throw in sponsorships inside. It doesn't feel natural. It takes away from the show. People feel like they've been farmed to come into the show just so they can listen to that 5-minute pitch. It doesn't work. I personally wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I'm sure you would agree with that as well. So then the question becomes, how does someone utilize a show or a brand that they've built to monetize their skill set outside of that?
Right. And I love how you said it, right? Spaces are very delicate, right? Because the moment someone hears a space become very shilly is the immediate red flag, right? And 9 times out of 10, where space hosts fail is at the title, is already at the beginning of what is the discussion today. Because for an example, right? Imagine your title for your space is like this project, right? It's the name of the project, and then it just says Q&A.
Yes.
No one is gonna tune into that, right?
100%.
And so what I try to do is, for an example, let's say that my space's topic for this week is gonna be on building communities in the bear market, right? And so I'll reach out to or let's say the opposite. Let's say these 3 projects reach out to me like, hey Bossa, like, we want to come on your spaces, what is the process there, right? So then that's where, one, I have the opportunity to monetize, but also at the same time, right, I want to make sure that we're not talking about you as a project. You're going to be talking about what is it like to be building a community in your project, right? And in my space, we're going to discuss how can we let's create a strategy in the middle of the spaces live of what is it really like to build a community in the bear. So where I've done there is I've made my clients, these people who have paid for a spot, to not talk about themselves, but to engage in the discussion, right? And that's how you avoid that shilly approach to spaces, So as long as you can turn their direction away from not talking about themselves, and it's more so of they're engaging in the discussion, but they can reference their project.
Expertise.
Yes, they can leverage their expertise and their experience of what it's like to build a project. That's when it's like, okay, they're not shilly, but they're referencing their project as a supportive point to enhance their argument in the discussion, right? So it's one of those little tweaks that you have to do when it comes to your questions and the way you point the microphone to these people. But obviously the thing to avoid is do not make it sound shilly, right? That's the biggest trap to fall for. So I hope that one kind of made sense.
It totally did, man. Totally did. Another one that is very popular that I see happen a lot, and these are things that we've either done internally at Unfungible or we get the opportunities ourselves is going on other people's spaces and being paid just to be there, to be present, because people value our brand recognition. I personally don't do it myself, but Kermit often gets invitations because he's built a huge presence on X specifically, so he often gets invited on these.
Right.
And he's very selective with who he works with. But my question to you, Bausa, is that is, I would say, the most common way spaces hosts end up making money. How much can one make with that?
Oh man, I mean, I've heard crazy amount of prices, you know, and it's one of those things where it is that social currency, right? That you do have to kind of ask yourself, like, what am I valued at? You know, what is my price point for my brand, right? So it takes a lot of separation from you as an individual, and you really have to look at yourself as a business when people ask you this, right? Because you yourself, with all these packed skills and knowledge, how can you put a price point on that? You know? So I've seen people talk like they speak for $1,000, right? Some people talk for $250. Some people talk for $300, $500. I remember my first one, I got paid $300 to co-host a space. Nice. And it was like one of those like greatest feelings ever. It's like, whoa, like I've never had this done before, you know? Yeah. So it just depends though, you know, what is your social value? What is your social currency? And what price point do you think you're worth, you know?
So I'll share this with the audience because we do have experience with this, and we know that below 10K, and this is for established spaces host. Below 10K typically will be around $300 per hour of their time to be on your show. This is speaking, not co-hosting. Co-hosting is different. Between 10K to 25K, you're looking between 300 to 500. 25 to 50K, you're in that 500 to 1,000 range, and 50K plus, you're looking at $1,000.
Yeah.
And people, number one, are willing to pay that. Just for your information, people are willing to pay $1,000 to have you on their spaces for 1 hour. Imagine making $1,000 in 1 hour. Just you sitting there, and you're probably talking 10 minutes total during that spaces. Because brands value, number one, the association they would get by being around you, and number two, I do think there is a scarcity in quality space hosts that brands can associate themselves with. If you were to ask me, Leon, who are the top spaces hosts, I can probably count them on you know, it's in the 2 digits, 20, 25, 30, 35, but it's definitely not in the thousands. So there's a small pool of people brands can fish to. And I do think it is the time right now to position yourself as a spaces host.
Right.
It's an opportunity for grabs.
Yes. And that's the thing too, is what's funny is I know for a lot of people on social platforms in general that vanity metrics, right? These follower numbers, these engagement numbers, right? A lot of people use these as measurement tools to determine, is this guy worth bringing up to my show? Or is this guy worth enough to give him my own money so that I can get the value that I see in him, right? So there's a huge emphasis on that. And this is why I can't express how important it is, going back to what we were saying earlier, of that foundation, right? Because that foundation, that's forever, right? That's year one to whenever you quit being a creator, right? So as long as that is something that is steadily growing, whether that's in engagement, whether that's in follower ratio, follower numbers, these vanity metrics, right? As long as that's steadily growing, your income steadily grows with that, right? So that's how I look at like this business game is people, I know for a fact people will always look at these vanity metrics. And so if you can match your value with who you are as a person to whatever amount of followers or numbers, engagement you have, right? There is a price point in there. But just know that the more you grow, the higher price that price point does get, you know. So yeah, that's something that I'm definitely
love
like
that,
looking
man.
forward to. I can't wait to be in that 50K 100K follower range.
One day
Yeah.
you will, man. I know you will. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's NFT Bausa on X. What times do your Brick by Brick shows happen on Wednesdays?
So they're actually on Thursdays. So they're every Thursday at
Every Thursdays?
every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. 1 p.m. Eastern every Thursday, and come by Brick by Brick for everything personal growth, Web3, and education.
My man Bausa, thanks a lot, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it.